agendized. If three or more want to show up, we can put that on an agenda,
Cool.
but then it becomes open to the public.
Right.
So you have to
And,
kind of weigh that.
I think it's good to be able to get
Yeah.
more. As usual, we'll be waiting just a few moments as folks join in and get added. I like Kaylin Murray's note that she's added "from Clinton" to her name, so that when she comments, it comes up with that information automatically. That's a fantastic idea.
I want to apologize for how silly looking this giant cup of tea is.
These things get long, got to stay hydrated. Okay, it's looking like we haven't gained any more folks in a minute or two. So with that, I will call this workshop to order. And we will begin with the land acknowledgement. South Whidbey School District would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral homelands, originally known as Shekolchi, in Lushootseed of the coastal Salish peoples, on the lands of the Lower Skagit, Tulalip, Swinomish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish, who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial and have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude to the Indigenous people of this territory and for their enduring care and protection of the land in which we currently occupy and share through the Treaty of Point Elliott, signed by 82 tribes in Mukilteo on January 22nd, 1855. As usual with our Zoom board meetings, we always love to hear from the community, and if community members would like to comment, they can do so through the Q&A function. I will then read them to be responded to by myself, by Dr. Moshe, or by whoever has the expertise in the situation, be it another board member or a member of the administration. However, I will only read those comments that come with name and location attached to them. I will not read anonymous comments. As this is a workshop, comments should come in on the topics discussed. General public comment is reserved for business meetings. I believe that's all that the prior announcements I need to make. Dr. Moshe, if you would like to get on, move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Let's see. It always becomes interesting when I have to share my screen and all I see is my Zoom stuff. Okay, let's see. Be with you momentarily. There we
As
go.
that's coming up, I will note that once again, my internet connection is still a little shaky. So if I freeze, I apologize. I'll be back shortly.
Please confirm that you see my screen.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you, because I talked for 5 minutes and then you let me know last time, so, okay. So again, I just want to give the board an update. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. Things are certainly bright on the horizon though, so our goals, again, safety of students and staff, and slowly bringing back face-to-face instruction, maintaining a robust education. So where we are right now is pretty exciting. As you know, kindergarten has been in since the 14th of September. They went from 2 days a week to 4. They've been doing a wonderful job. Students at greatest risk and our special education students also we're back by November 9th. First and third grade, February 22nd, March 1st, grade 2, and this past Monday, 4, 5, and 6. So we are in hybrid mode, maintaining distance, wearing masks, and Jordan and his colleagues return Monday. So our 7-12 comes back beginning Monday. There's an open house, a Falcon drive-through on Friday, and athletics are underway. So students have been participating. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that when Jordan has an opportunity to talk, maybe. We're in moderate. As of this morning, we're in moderate. When I put this slideshow together last week, getting ready for tonight, we were in low, but we have changed. And that is because of an outbreak on the Navy base. Apparently some sailors returned from out of state and brought COVID with them, and there are over 40 cases. And given how small the island is and how few cases we had, as soon as that hit our data, it basically doubled our data. But in my health department phone call this morning, it was very clear that though those folks may have contact, they're all in quarantine. They may have had contact with some folks that live with them, but they're anticipating that this will start to go right back down again. I mean, again, highly not just encouraged, but required really to maintain all of the precautions of masks and distance and so on as a community. But we believe this is an anomaly.
Hey, Joe, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. I just got a text from a usual participant, and she says that the website and Facebook links aren't working, but she was able to get in through Navigator. So there may be some people scrambling to try to get in. So I don't know if we want to say
Okay,
something.
we can reach back and take a look at that.
Okay, perfect.
While we're going.
Perfect. She did say she was able to get through the Navigator email, so that link works.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for letting us know. Hopefully we can get that corrected while we're going through this. Let me see.
And so if anyone asks any of the attendees how to get on, the Navigator link is a good way to go.
Yeah, and we're going to shoot out a link on Facebook right now and get that going. So hopefully people can connect in. Back to the data. So our positivity rate, again, if you look at the numbers, the positive numbers, it's not outrageous, but because of that, it shoots the positivity rate right up. Luckily, the hospitalization rate is remaining steady. So again, we'll know more as we go forward, but it's we're still in the moderate range, so we're still moving forward with our plans. Nothing has changed in that regard. And again, continuing mitigation. So exciting news for those of you who were able to take advantage of the opportunity. Anybody with a school district email in the state of Washington is eligible for a vaccine. So we believe that most staff have at least one dose on board, and if not, they have an appointment if they so choose to get vaccinated. And most all of our staff want a vaccination. So that's really good news. Tentatively scheduled March 27th for the second round of that. That's still tentative, but that so far is what we're hearing. Again, Island Drug organized it, and they brought in many helpers, whether they were EMTs or other support personnel, and it was a very smooth operation. Again, our mitigation continues with masks and distancing, ventilation. Every classroom has a air cleaner in it, and we're still working to get COVID testing on site. That has not come to fruition at this point, but it is still something we're working to have happen. So our next steps, we are in the midst of bringing our students back. So our teachers are very much engaged in that work. Administratively, we are already starting conversations around what we can do this summer, early summer being opportunities for students to go to camps and so on. It will be facilitated through Readiness to Learn. So those families who may not otherwise be able to afford it will be able to be scholarshiped for those kinds of opportunities. We're planning some of our own opportunities, and we are looking at August for, I don't want to call it summer school because of what that may bring up for people, but opportunities for academics, social, emotional opportunities, outdoor opportunities, whatever we can come up with in August. And then some plans for next year that we can enhance what we're offering to students, whether it's through social work or other kinds of opportunities. Again, this is a one-shot funding so far as we know, and the board will have the opportunity to see the plan and tweak the plan and approve the plan before it gets submitted. But it isn't, that's where we are right now, is putting our thoughts together and getting some input on what our next steps could be. Lots of folks asking about what if and what happens. There's a lot of discussion at levels well over my head about what school will look like in September. Right now, we know what we know, and that is that masks will likely be worn by all of us for quite some time into the future. We don't know if the 6 feet of distance will remain in place, or if it will, once we get some herd immunity, drop to 3 feet. Some states have dropped it to 3 feet, and that's being looked at as what's happening with that. But there's a lot of talk legislatively, a lot of talk Department of Health wise. So again, we don't know the answer to that. If we still have to maintain 6 feet of distance, then we know we need to stay hybrid. If that is reduced to 3 feet, it's entirely possible that we could come back full time. We are in discussions about maintaining our ability to pivot. So helping to do that may be using Wednesdays as a remote day for students, as opposed to bringing them in for part of the day. They would be on a remote day, and we would have teachers work with them remotely and then be able to do teacher-directed activities for part of that time and district-directed trainings and activities. But that is yet to be determined. Again, it's a conversation at this point, but it's something that we're considering. And that's our update on where we are with face-to-face. So board questions, comments, concerns?
I think I'll just reiterate, Joe, I think you've done a really nice job working with the entire team to pull this together in a way that staff feel safe, students feel safe, and we are hopefully supporting our families in these moves as we move through that. I also really appreciate you starting the conversation about what next year looks like. I haven't seen too many conversations in other areas looking at what is next year, and I appreciate that you are forward thinking in planning for that.
I want to see, Jordan, how are students feeling about coming back?
I know that a lot of students are excited. After like looking at like all the schedules and stuff, it's definitely something that it's gonna look different, but I know that a lot of students are excited to finally just be able to be face to face and have the student to teacher relationship.
Excellent. We've seen these things so many times now that I don't really have any questions. I appreciate that you tracked down the source of the surge or found out the source of the surge so we don't have to worry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to restate the gratitude for the clear information and the foresightful planning, and also share how exciting it is to just see students outdoors on the playing fields again. And the energy of joy and connection is really nice to feel and see.
Kim Taxney noted, maybe I missed this, when will a decision need to be made for what school will look like in September? Of course, with the hope that the COVID trends continue to improve. And so some of that is, we can't make a decision until the until the state does
Well,
about distances.
Essentially, a couple of decisions, right? There's a decision about what we're doing with ESSER funding and whether or not we can, summer program, things like that. The decision about what September looks like, essentially, as you say, Brooke, it's out of our hands. If it changes to a 3-foot distance between students, then we know we'll be able to put more students into classrooms. Once everybody's vaccinated, that changes things again. Will there be herd immunity? But the discussion around how we're using our Wednesdays is a negotiated discussion that we are in the process of working with teachers on. So that decision will be made hopefully before we're out of school for the summer. But that's only regarding the Wednesday piece. The part about what our school days look like is really dependent on the Department of Health.
Question from Wendy Hastings in Freeland. Do we have a number for how many students are using the buses and how full the buses are?
I don't have a number for that. Dan may have a better idea, but we won't really know how full they are until 7/12 comes back Monday.
Yeah. It'd be good I'm sure that Dan would already put this in his report, but that'd be a good addition to his report for the next business meeting. Any other questions from board members? Damien, Marnie, Ann, Andrea already said something, Jordan. Okay, I think we're set on that. Thank you again, Dr. Moshe, for once again putting all that together.
Okay, so we're moving on to policy, and I'd like to have the administrative team come in as panelists in case the board has questions. Oh, thank you.
Jill, do we want to thank?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So I'm sorry, I didn't have the agenda in front of me. Absolutely, we want to thank our classified staff. These are folks who, the pandemic started and our teachers were forced to go remote, but many classified staff stayed on the job, wearing masks, doing all of the work that was required of them, feeding students, using buses to transport food, keeping our buildings maintained, doing deferred maintenance. And then when school opened, our classified staff often were the first folks to be working with students. So it's been a heck of a year. We know how hard our classified staff work in any given year. This year, everybody is going the extra mile, and they have really allowed us to function and to do the work that has been necessary to do with all of our students and families, outreach and technology, and the extra load on our technology department. There are countless ways that our support staff have come through. So the least I can do is say thank you for all of their work. And I hope, I know that you all join in that gratitude for all of these folks and all the work they do, keeping school offices opening and handing out textbooks. And, our secretaries never stopped and our custodians never stopped. And so it's, I always get worried when I mention a particular group that I forgot to mention another, but they're all up on the screen. And just, again, all of the work that folks have done, we are so grateful, and our students and families are so grateful.
Yeah, and on a direct board related note, all of the secretaries and assistants who keep us up to date on what's going on, make sure we're on the newsletters and all of that.
Okay, so we're diving into policy and we're starting with the student discipline policy. And I want to just give a little bit of context because the last time we visited this, we had a very different board, and some members of our community may not have been attending at that time. But 2 years ago, Washington State changed their discipline policy. They eliminated zero tolerance. And so we went through this policy prior to the 2019-2020 school year starting. And the discipline shifts that were made was really in efforts to change school districts' practice into restorative justice. And that's why you will see so much talk at the high school about restorative practices and restorative circles. You'll hear it at the middle school. You'll hear it at the elementary level. And so as we go through this policy, just keeping in mind that a lot of the changes that occurred happened at the state level. What we are really looking at is going through and seeing what's working well, what parts maybe did we not foresee. And when I say we, I mainly mean the people who are working and enacting this. We really want to know what your feedback is around it. And then there are pieces, and Christy has done an amazing job of highlighting these sections where there are optional pieces that we could add to or expand to based on the nature of our community and our practices. So with that, I think what might be helpful is if we go through this in terms of layers. So when I reviewed this, I looked for gender inclusive language. I looked for some of those buzzwords that we've been looking for in our equity practices. I didn't see any. I feel like Christy caught the majority of them or all of them because I didn't find any. So I think my first question to the staff would be, and the board would be, is there anything that I overlooked or that Christy may have overlooked in pulling this together?
The one thing along those lines that I noted, I saw, I think it was 10 references to parents that should probably become parents or guardians.
Okay. Good catch, Brooke. And Lorinda Newton from Clinton is asking a question of what does culturally responsive discipline mean? And I believe the intention of the policy when that language was put into place is that we are so restorative justice at a school setting is intended to keep students on site and to help facilitate ongoing conversations with students to help them understand the impact of actions and to help them identify and work through ways to repair. So when we talk about culturally responsive discipline, it means including a cultural lens in those conversations and how we are navigating those. So it's being mindful of what may or may not be in our awareness of what we're asking them to do or how we may be asking them to respond that creates discord with their culture and or systems of power.
I think it also reminds us to look at our discipline and determine if there's any disproportionality regarding implementation of discipline, especially because of potential cultural differences that
Mhm.
we're not attending to.
Okay, so I'm not hearing anybody catching any of those other pieces.
Oh, can you just go up, scroll up, back up a little bit? This came up last time we met. The language around, if you look at the paragraph that begins, the district will follow practices, the last sentence, the district will ensure it reviews disaggregated discipline data.
Mhm.
Didn't indicate subgroup, right? That's the term that would be most
Right.
appropriate in the other policy that we had talked about, and that's what you used. So it's disaggregated discipline data, disaggregated student data, as opposed to the subgroup term that came up last time. So
And Gwendy from Freeland has the question, while we're talking about discipline, what is the process when a student is found with a substance and they are underage? Are the authorities contacted? Are the parents contacted? And what disciplinary action is taken?
so
And,
again, I don't know if you want me to jump in here, Andrea.
oh, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that question relates to the specific discipline that is a building level discipline policy. So this, we do actually have policy around substances, and the buildings each have a response to substances. And I know I'm looking at Paul, he's the first one on my screen. So we definitely have a response to it, but that really gets into the out of the board realm and into the building
Building
level
level.
discipline.
Yeah. Lorinda Newton would like an example. So if we think about sometimes if students are having a disagreement, we'll facilitate a conversation, and when we establish those norms in the conversation, we'll say terms like students will look each other in the eye when they apologize, or we might require them to write an apology note or something. Depending on the student's cultural background. So for instance, if they are Asian American, if they are Native American, that could actually be seen as really disrespectful. And the looking in the eye portion. And so we could inadvertently, because the white dominant culture says that that is how you show respect and that is how you show sincerity, we are creating conflict with the other person's culture. And it doesn't mean that we don't have those conversations. It doesn't mean that people don't code switch and that they engage in that behavior at times. But it means that we are mindful and we recognize it, and that we leave the door open to ask. If I think about my own teaching practice, if I have a student I had a female student who was Muslim, and she struggled with regulating her social emotional needs. And we took into account what her religion was comfortable with in terms of who was supervising her or who was interacting with her, or if somebody needed to touch her, that like we were aware of that. So we had female staff with her. And that was something that we did to be culturally responsive in that.
And to jump back to Gwendy's question, policy around substance abuse is 2121. That specifically addresses substance abuse, and 4215 addresses tobacco and nicotine use. So we do have specific policies around those things. It's just not this policy.
Okay, so if we go through and Lorinda says that that makes sense, and that she's familiar with the Asian and Native American culture, not looking in the eye, and it was helpful to her. So I'm really glad. If we look at the highlighted portions, is there anything that we want to insert into there that is different from what is already there? And I'm thinking especially, I think it was page 2, had whether or not we involve any community groups.
Yep. Yeah. And I was also.
Well, I was
just-
off page 1.
And I was also.
And we did, through the discipline policy change, involve discipline group. Again, Paul was charged with leading that group, and he had meetings when the policy was changing, or when the practices were changing, the procedures were changing
Mhm.
based on this policy change.
Brooke, I heard a little internet lag as you were sharing. Would you be willing to repeat that?
Oh, I was just saying, I was glancing through our equity policy to see if we created a specific group in that policy that we should reference here, but I don't believe that we have.
No, I think that was part that was going to go to procedure.
Mhm. Yep. I just wanted to make sure on that one, and it looks like that's exactly correct. As
Okay.
I expect. So this is also the point at which this is a workshop that is open to the community. So if the community does have any additional suggestions or inputs here, we welcome them. We will keep moving so we don't wait here, but please, if you have an idea or thought, chime in the Q&A.
Yeah. My next question, once we've kind of gone through those highlighted pieces where I'm not hearing a whole lot of thoughts, this would be towards Mr. Swanson, Dr. Fankhauser, Ms. Richard, Mr. Lagerstad, there we go, Ms. Phillips, and Mr. Patton. Are there any pieces of this discipline policy, as you have been working with it over the last, I feel like you probably had about a 5-month ramp up before things shifted and changed. In those 5 months, was there anything that really was just odd or clunky, or things that you wanted us to come back to?
John,
I'll speak. Andrea, that's a great question. I think we have to remember, for the past year, we've been in remote learning. So obviously there hasn't been a whole lot of discipline around that. But what was really encouraging, and Paul may have some statistics to share, I don't know, I don't want to put them on the spot, but the start of the 1920 school year, our discipline referrals and incidences went way down. And so it was really positive. And again, like you said earlier, Andrea, the whole state finally, a little late, but finally reformed all of our discipline policies. And it was really because of also, we need to remember, across the state, the BIPOC students in the state were really, the rates of suspension were much higher for the BIPOC community of students. So that was one of the main reasons for the overhaul too. But actually, it's been really, really positive. It's been going really well. Now we're going to get back into live, so we'll see. But again, we're really encouraged by our current policy and also our current student handbook.
And John, I do have some statistics. The number of referrals and incidents for 18-19 was 51. And last year, up through the halfway through March, it was 17.
Mm-hmm.
So it had taken a drastic, a really significant drop in how we were approaching discipline.
and James, you have some stats as well to share, I know.
Yeah, so as far as middle school, we were looking into restorative practices before the state came out with their suggestions and mandates to overhaul the discipline. So we were actually on the right track and just leading into it. And The policies and procedures that we have in place have been working well, and we're getting better at restorative practices year in and year out. It's like anything else, right? It just takes time and experience. Yeah, our numbers in 17-18, we actually had 117 overall. Then we started, we overhauled and started implementing our restorative practices. 18-19, it dropped to 79. And then in 19-20, up to March, we had 12. So we were seeing considerable decreases. And it's going to fluctuate, you know, year in and year out, but we are seeing a trend that we really are positive about.
That's awesome. So the one question that I have, and I would not expect people to have this from here, is Joe pointed out that we do pull the disaggregated data and we do look at that for trends. And one thing that I'm wondering, and I don't know that I would want to look at adding this for our next meeting, but the one piece of language that I see kind of missing in the discipline policy as a whole would be recognition of students with special education with behavior intervention plans. And I don't know if it should be brought out in this or if that should stay more at a policy level. But I think that one of the pieces that might be nice to look at is how the student's behavior intervention plan is utilized and factored into the discipline policy or a discipline approach. And again, I wouldn't expect people to have those numbers or whatnot, but I would love to hear other people's thoughts about whether or not that should fit here or if it should fit more at a building level or let students be general education students first and not bring it up at all.
I guess I wouldn't mind speaking to that. First, before I start speaking, I would say that I wanted to reiterate the shout out to our classified staff, because I think that if you look at the entire district over the last couple of years, we have included them in many of the restorative practice trainings. They also, paraeducators, for example, had additional training requirements that, not that they do discipline, but model quality behaviors throughout the school. And those that modeling has had a positive influence on our overall numbers. As far as behavior intervention plans for individual students, I think that that information is certainly left to individualized education plans rather than building level disaggregation. But if you look at our discipline data, it is easily teased out special ed, race, gender, and those other components of disproportionality that is really the reason for this discipline shift. Mm-hmm. And so I guess to answer your question, I have information around behavioral intervention plans, but I think that you could argue that because the overall building discipline numbers are down because of the new policy, that is also leading to a reduction in some of those behavior plans that we had in place before. If you have a specific question about how those would be tracked, we track them through the use of forms and all of those kind of things at each of the schools. But I want to make sure that
I don't think I'm asking for the students with behavior intervention plans to be tracked. I think what I'm looking for is whether or not we add language that when you are doing a holistic look at the student, that if a student were to have that is part of the holistic look. Because I think that sometimes you have students who receive special education services, they have this plan, an incident happens, but we're not looking at that plan in terms of what factors did it play into the situation. So I think it's more of just question. Like, is it something?
I think the IEP teams are looking at incidents and then eventually modifying and changing up, if you will, the behavior plans to support
Yeah.
a reduction in behavior, you know?
Yeah.
And it does inform the creation of those plans over time. And so some of the strategies that used to be built into behavioral intervention plans that are no longer because of this policy also create less situations where that intervention may be used, if that makes sense.
And Andrea, this might also relate. I was thinking to myself about whether or not we should have something specific about teaching and training microaggressions, but a lot of the language in page 2, the second paragraph under development and review, those 4 points covers a lot of different area and may cover what you're concerned about also. I don't know if it's good to call these things out specifically still, but I think that it could be covered by a lot of that.
So, and I'm gonna just throw out just a hypothetical, right? Like this is not a South Whidbey reflective example, but having worked in this field for a while, right? You will go into a building, situation occurs at lunch, right? And the administration is working to respond to it. And they move through their own pieces, right? They move through their own policy, their own practices. And the special education team finds out on the after end. And then they say, oh, wait, this student has a behavior intervention plan exactly for this behavior that is occurring. And those approaches are not always in alignment. So what the behavior intervention plan says we do is not always in alignment with the behavior discipline plan of a building and or of a district.
Andrea, one thing I would say at the high school, if ever I have an incident that I'm dealing with discipline with a student, I always pull them up on Skyward. And if they're identified as having an IEP, I always, I want to say always, speak to the case manager prior to doing discipline. That is part of what you do.
That's awesome, Paul. And I am so glad that you do that. I think that there are places where that doesn't occur. And I'm wondering if we capture that here. So it's not a reflection on what people are or aren't doing. It's a question of whether or not we capture it here so that we make sure that those two documents are not working separate from each other, that they're working together.
Andrea, maybe you could write the inclusive language and then bring it back to us and let us look at that and go from there.
Chew on it. Thank you for volunteering me, Damon. I appreciate that.
Well, and Andrea, I want to agree with you specifically that I think codifying good behavior that is already happening is really important.
Yeah.
To make sure it continues to happen years down the road. But yeah, yes, fully supportive.
Okay. That was my one piece with that. Does anybody have anything else that you want to change with it? All right, should we move on, Christy?
Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome. Okay, social emotional climate. Give people a second. And I think for me, as evidence of our board presentation 2 meetings back, I think we see this in action. So I think the first question is it in alignment with our equity policy? Do we see all of the language changes that we are looking for? And then is there anything we would like to add and or change? And I see a question from the community. Lori Johnson from Freeland says that she thinks the schools have done a good job with positive school-wide expectations and social emotional learning, which is the foundational in reducing discipline issues, especially at the K-4 level. That's a Susie shout out.
That is what we want to hear.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Lori.
So I had, again, just some detail-oriented stuff. I think we need some semicolons in the list in the second paragraph. There's lists within lists. Yeah, the second paragraph there. There's so after dignity, I think should be a semicolon. After
Did Brooke freeze, or is he thinking hard?
no,
He froze.
triple nested going on here.
Brooke, my inner copy editor is struggling here a little bit too.
Yep.
And I wonder about just reordering the clauses in the sentence.
We also
including-
have duplication between the first and second paragraph.
The sentence above nurturing a positive social emotional climate is another one that includes lists within lists, or could potentially be reframed in a way that breaks it into two sentences. But that's the kind of wordsmithing that might be hard to do without sitting down with a pencil.
Do you want to do that and then send that back to Christy?
I'd be happy to.
I am not a good editor
Yeah, I
of
can
grammar or copy
absolutely
things.
do a quick copy edit just for improving clarity in those long paragraph sentences.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marnie.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And maybe seeing if we can tighten up some of that duplication between the first and second paragraph, because we've got a couple of sections that are exactly the same.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other pieces of it that we want to look at changing in terms of like the content of it?
I didn't have any problems with the content. The cross-references, I think, could also, the cross-references list could get much longer. I don't know if it should, but it certainly could. We could hit the equity policy, we could hit character development, multicultural education, sexual harassment, bullying, non-discrimination, gender inclusivity, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, dress code. All of these things fit into this idea, but I don't know how big we want that list of cross-references to be.
Brooke, I am amazed at you for pulling that out.
It's certainly, if you send that, your wordsmithing and your listing to us, we'll get it included. It doesn't hurt to have the cross-reference. It does make it easier as one who has to look to board policy. It often helps to have those cross-references in there. So I think it's a great idea.
I only made it through the 3000s, but I will go through the 5000s and get that list to you, to Christy.
Awesome. Lorinda Newton from Clinton, in the social emotional climate, how is equitable education defined? And that she wishes these policy documents had more definitions. So in terms of how equitable education is defined, I think that referencing our student equity policy would be a good place to define that. In a nutshell, that policy speaks to eliminating systemic barriers that students may face in terms of accessing an education to the level of their choice. So that can look at in terms of them feeling socially safe, emotionally safe, and physically safe. It can also speak to opportunities that they are provided. So course classes, course offerings, opportunities for athletics, and just more around their day-to-day operation in the school.
And of note,
Great
this is-
example of that would be one of the things that we would track is how many female students are taking advanced math courses and advanced science courses in comparison to their male peers. And if there's discrepancy there, looking at the why.
And students from lower income households as well, making sure that they're involved in all of this, and students experiencing homelessness.
Yep.
We've got a long list of, in our equity policy, which is 0001, we've got a long list of the thus far, the statuses that we're watching for in our equity work. So
Okay.
it's a very broad and deep list.
Yeah. All right, people are very quiet, so let's move on to our next one. This is dress code. Our dress code policy, I believe we brought it up. Christy, would you scroll down to the bottom? Because I think we took a look at it just a couple of years ago. So,
I
yeah,
actually, in our conversation with our United Student Leaders last month, this conversation came up in depth. And so we had 2 board members attend and I attend that. And we thought it would be the perfect time to put student dress code on for the board to have discussion around, because the students felt that they wanted more input on the implementation of policy. And so with this particular one, I know Kayla may want to speak to this because she's our intern. And so as an intern, this is one of her pieces. So Kayla.
Yes, Andrea, I'll use your word voluntel.
Yeah.
And I am happily ready to take it on. I have a lot of colleagues around the state and other places, and I'm looking and digesting our dress code in comparison to other schools and kind of anecdotally talking to some students and staff. And I think taking a look at this from your level and then maybe some re-education as we transition back to person about what our expectations of one another is and what's appropriate within our level of self-expression and safety, especially in the times that we've been away from each other for a year and norms have changed. So it might be a healthy time to hear some student input, staff input, and make sure that we all have a collective agreement as to what we define as what we accept.
Yeah.
Well, and it's an older policy, it's 10 years old at this point based on its last revision. So I'm really excited to hear what parts we want to adjust and what parts we want to change.
So one of the things that our students really reacted to, I think, and everybody, most of the people in on this panel were in the room, but they reacted very strongly to the differences among teachers and how they perceived what the actual, not just the policy, but the actual discipline code and handbook said about dress code. And one of the things that really stuck with me was the gender inequity. The idea that if a student who presents as male wears a certain outfit, maybe showing his chest or midriff, and a girl who presents as female and identifies as female does the same, they would be called out differently around that dress code. So those were some of the examples that came to us from the students, some from several years ago. And obviously we haven't been in school in a year, so there's not anything from the past year, but it was really about making sure that we're being equitable across gender. So, if it's objectionable, it shouldn't matter what gender expression you are.
If I may add on to that, I also heard from the students a concern about the way the same outfit may be perceived differently depending on a student's body shape or size, and also gaps in training or better opportunities in training for the enforcement of dress codes, so that perhaps we might use a more neutral, what's the term for a figure that wears clothes like in a in a shopping mall.
Like a
But
mannequin?
A mannequin, yes. Like
Yes,
for instance,
exactly.
training
Yep.
using mannequins of different shapes and sizes and types so that the attention to the policy can go to the strictly what is allowable and not allowable versus how it might be perceived on a particular person's body.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, I know there was a suggestion to just show images of the clothes that were being addressed rather than show them on anyone.
Yeah, but wouldn't be on a human. It would be on a mannequin that has no obvious gender, right? So that it becomes just about the clothing. And so we're in process, right? Working with students and staff. Kayla is in process. And the students were interested in what Kayla is talking about, which is looking at other schools and how they implement. And again, can we establish sort of a baseline for staff so that if they are seeing a particular student in a particular outfit, they would know how to address whether or not it's appropriate or not. So that's why this is on here. And when I looked at the policy, and obviously if the board sees changes, then that's the board's purview, but it was really more about having the conversation around it at this level to know where the board is at and where the administration is at. Because this, by and large, is one of the most difficult policies to implement because it is so personal to, one's clothing is very personal. And so what one person may find objectionable, another may not. So.
And it's also a situation where there are some generational differences, even between myself and the current students, or
as far as I'm concerned, if we just said they had to cover up from the neck to the knees, it would be okay. But that is my generational difference.
Joe, when you are 6'1", it is really hard to find clothes that go to your knees. I'm just gonna say.
Yeah, I know. I'm one of the lucky ones. My, when I used to step into the batter's box, I had a very small strike zone and I really liked that, right? So there are benefits for all of us depending on our body type.
And how does this relate to the policy on cultural diversity? Maybe you're from Mars and you completely dress a different way than somebody from Saturn.
And that's part of it, Damien. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. One needs to take away that piece of it. That's the whole point of.
You're taking away their culture. I mean, I'll just say maybe it's somebody from France. We have a foreign exchange student from France and they dress differently.
Yeah,
Well,
it's different than that. I think it's really more about where we get into trouble with people making judgments are about exposure. Is it okay to expose a spaghetti strap? Is it okay to expose a midriff? Is it okay to, they brought up an example the students did. There was a young person who identified as male at a ball game wearing, was topless and wore coconut shells. And if that were a girl, would it have been objectionable? So those are the kinds of things that are very specific, more so than cultural differences. But again, that is a piece of it as well, is what may or may not be acceptable.
And in the beginning of this policy, it states that the student will discuss their dress attire with their parent. And I would think Brooke would have been on that already, fixing and adding language for guardian. But seeing as it's 10 years old, the issue that I'm still trying to relay here is that you may not have a one size fits all.
Right, there will
Right.
have to be some guidelines above the specifics
Mhm.
that are less clear than we would like them to be, that cover all the cases. And then specifics below that that may have outliers. Dr. Moshe and Ms. Phillips were talking about looking.
Brooke, we lost you.
He'll come back. Just give him a second.
Yeah, but I wanted him to know where he cut off so he can pick back up and, or maybe
Thank
we didn't
you.
need to.
We lost you at looking.
Yeah, so yeah, looking at other school districts, in particular, the one that these students brought up as one that they thought was well crafted was the Seattle Public School District's policy. And it has that cultural part to it in the core values related to student dress that serve as the foundation. And then it has details beneath that.
Mhm.
Thanks for that input there, Brooke. I think I might like to see their dress code policy.
I
Yeah,
would just elaborate. I'm sorry.
Nope.
I would just elaborate that part of the expression of concern from the students is about the language in the policy, but a larger part of what I heard was about training and implementation, both to decrease the potential of sway towards overly penalizing one group or another, and partly to ensure that when there is an intervention about a dress code violation, it's done so in a respectful and supportive manner, as opposed to in a manner that might provoke more embarrassment or a feeling of being called out in the presence of peers.
And we've been asked by staff in the last couple of years to address this policy as well, or to enforce the policy. I think maybe that's what it was. But so I know that we get it from all sides, but I think it's more than a one night fix here.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Time here to really evaluate what we're looking at.
No,
Yeah,
this
this-
is just to
this-
start the discussion.
Yeah, that's why this one was last, Damien, on the list for tonight. It's because this is really more about the discussion and the process. And it will evolve and change. What was culturally acceptable 5 years ago, in 5 years from now, may be different again. So this one keeps changing. The policy in practice, the discipline code at the building level is very bland on purpose, because we did go through a change and it was much more restrictive. So, again, I think it has a lot to do with implementation and training. And again, it's part of our equity work, part of our being culturally responsive, responsive to, gender, and the fact that, we recognize that there are non-binary students, that there are transgender students, that there are students whose gender expression may not match their gender at birth. So many variations. So being cognizant of that and helping staff to recognize appropriate and inappropriate, I think it's much bigger than a one night conversation.
I think the one piece that is coming forward for me, and Marnie and Anne, this might be somewhere where you can help capture what it is that I'm thinking and feeling. I was in a meeting earlier this week, and a cisgender male was making a joke about wearing a dress on his last day of work, and it was meant to be kind of a funny mockery piece, and it just felt off to me in terms of like, how would students who are not non-gender conforming feel about that? And I don't know what the right words are for that, but I feel like I want something in this that protects that, to where we're not crossing that as a joke, or we're not using it as a joke. But I also don't know if that's me being too serious or we're not having levity with it. I'm not sure.
You actually captured very much the whole struggle around this young person wearing a set of coconuts,
Mhm.
right? And it was meant as a joke and it was not funny to me.
Mhm.
I was present. Of course, Paul had to be the one to speak to the student. I went to Paul, because he's the person on duty. I was at a basketball game, spoke to the student and said, cover up. But that very sentiment, and I'm being personal now, that very sentiment of, am I being too sensitive? Should I, is it funny? Is this, so capturing that it's insulting, right? That's
Yeah.
what I felt. But to your point, Andrea, was I being too sensitive? Should I have? So.
Yeah, I feel like as a society, we're moving to a place where people can wear dresses if they want to wear dresses. People can wear pants if they want to wear pants, right? Like that's where we're moving to. And so I want something to capture that it's not a joke.
Andrea, I've had those experiences through leadership or assemblies where we want to have activities that are fun and engaging, and we're the ones who've had those conversations with the idea of what's funny to one person is offensive to another.
Yeah.
And with clothing, the idea is that clothing is expressive of who you are as a person, and when it's in that, it's a sense of mockery, and somebody is, they have taken offense to that. So I think some clear understanding of the purpose of dress could be a clarity for that.
Yeah, I agree with that, Kayla. Creating some clarity. And also I like the idea of looking at the entire policy through an equitable lens. Not because culture goes beyond color and ethnicity. It goes absolutely into gender, absolutely into, what country someone's from, as Damien said. So I think looking at the whole thing through an equity lens, I think will also lend to some of that training around what language is appropriate to tell, like when you had to tell the human in the coconuts to put a shirt on, I'm sure it was addressed really thoughtfully and really well and tried to create a place for no shame for that kiddo. But I think it's hard for some people, especially when we work in spaces with kids, with minors, it's hard for us sometimes to know what language to use. So we're calling them in instead of calling them out, so that we're not shaming them in front of their peers, so that we don't feel shame and judgment for what we are seeing in front of us. And so that's not misconstrued. There's so many pieces to the puzzle. And so, Andrea, I absolutely hear what you're saying. And I think, capturing that essence of not only what it's like to be, someone who is affected by the policy, but someone who is a purveyor of the policy and needs to follow the policy. So if we all have common language and have some training around that, it really helps kids feel comfortable and safe to self-express, but also to feel safe when somebody, questions whether or not their self-expression is in the right place at the right time and is constructive.
Thank you, Anne.
I would agree with that, Anne, and I would just add that some language around mutual respect and care can be taken to ensure that one's own self-expression doesn't inhibit another student's feeling of being able to self-express or feel safe in the environment. Of course, it has to be done with care, but there can also be some language around wanting to understand a student's reason for dressing a certain way, as opposed to simply measuring the width of their straps on their shirt top, for instance. But at the possible risk of getting once again into the weeds of, micromanaging style choices. Agreed that it's not a one night discussion, but the beginning of a conversation. Thank you.
So what are next steps moving forward? Because I would love to be part of the ongoing conversation around this policy, because I think it's really important and really powerful to, you know, create the best situation for a really hard set of policies.
And before we dive into next steps, would you mind if Brooke had a chance to answer the questions we had?
Not at all. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
So we've got a couple of comment and a question from Lorinda Newton in Clinton. First of all, I'm going to read the comment, which was, our homeschool co-op printed photos of different people to show what was acceptable dress. That might work for you. I think the idea is very much the same. We want to do something like that, but we're hoping to do it on mannequins or hangers rather than on people, so we can take the gender of the body out of the question, or out of the concern. And then the other one is, how do you define a hate group? The Southern Policy Law Center lists many Christian ministries as hate groups, and Lorinda says that they are not. And that is one I do not know the answer to.
Once again, I think those, that information, one could probably, I would hope, agree that if, there was a Nazi symbol on one shirt or a KKK on one shirt, they are hate groups. Religious expression, students are certainly allowed their religious expression. So that's how I would define a hate group.
Something where the cause of the group is about hatred of others rather than a cause separate from others.
Mhm.
Something like that. That's a query on my own part.
And it might be warranted to research, what some common approaches to defining hate groups are, so that we can actually point to a concrete set of guidelines, just to bring more clarity to a policy that references banning hate group symbology.
That's the difficulty with, when you talk about gang-related apparel, even. That some symbols are co-opted, right? And so they become the symbol of a group that is a hate group.
Yeah, when I was in school, I really liked the logo of the LA Kings and didn't realize that had been co-opted by gang identities. So I couldn't wear my hat to school.
Well, and that might be a prime example of some simple education. We live on this island, and I've had kids that wear things that, because they don't often get off the island, maybe don't recognize it as that. So it is simply a conversation of what that might mean in certain time and place.
Well, and Ms. Phillips, I think you bring up the key point there, which is how we approach it. And as Marnie's been saying earlier, that's, and Anne as well, that's going to be a huge part of this policy, because that's one of the main concerns.
Yeah, and again, things evolve over time, right? What a symbol or a statement or a group may or may not meet the criteria. So, there are certain things that are obvious, that stay obvious, right? If you've got a beer can on your shirt, it's not appropriate. But then there are other symbols that the adults in the room don't necessarily even know that they are symbols of, we're just not that up to date on all of the things that kids may be expressing on their clothing. So
Lorinda brings up that she's concerned that some students may find Christian beliefs offensive and be offended by a cross necklace or such. That is protected religious expression.
Yep, it's protected.
Kayla, thank you for bringing up the fact that at the end of the day, it's about education. It's not about shaming kids. It's not about creating systems that work against people's expression. It's about educating kiddos and making sure that everybody feels as safe as they possibly can in the educational environment. And I think that's the whole goal here.
Mhm. And what we clearly heard from students is that that's not always the case for them. And that's why we are having this conversation.
Going back to Anne's point about next steps, unless there are any further questions.
Well, in terms of administratively, we are going down the road. Certainly if we have a board member or two who want to participate, we're also, Kayla's working with students on this and staff. So it's really around the implementation of board policy. Not so much that we're feeling like the policy needs to change, though again, if the board feels that they want to change policy, that is the board's purview. But we wanted to talk about it as we go toward an implementation to get a sense of, just bring it up to the board because it came up very clearly from our students. But also if there's any guidance from the board.
So I think what might be helpful for me is as you go down that road, and you're exploring other policies, if there's a piece of that policy that you really like, that I think helps bring clarity or adds to what we have, I would love for people to feel comfortable bringing it to us and saying, take a look at this, let's have a conversation about it. I think that, Damien, you found it. We need to add guardians to the parents. For now, but I would love to see as we roll out the training, as we roll out the implementation, as we look at other pieces, what are pieces that we could use to round this out so that it becomes more clear without narrowing the breadth of it.
As you were saying, Andrea, I very much agree that we can add some clarity to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worthy of a update.
Yeah, thank you for your work so far, Kayla, and thank you to the students too, who are offering some information and the teachers, and because you are all the ones who make the policies into strategies and goals. So thank you for all that work.
Happy to do it. It's fascinating to hear from students and be a younger female teacher on staff. I've had some experiences and I'm ready to see what kind of education we can give on the scope of everybody, because I think this serves the climate policy that you're looking at as well, because when there's a climate of shame around dress, what other types of feelings are we creating among students and staff? So I think that these really serve each other pretty nicely.
Fantastic. Thank you.
We do have one more community comment from Paul Rempa. He says that microaggression is defined as tiny insults, either perceived or not perceived. It's a nebulous term, therefore cannot be judged. Seattle School District's goal is not a goal to shoot for, and asks, can we include BLM as a hate group along with other radical groups? I think that is, thank you for your opinion. We will absolutely take that under advisement going forward. I personally disagree that we can't address microaggressions, but that's not something that will affect the board unless there is a vote on it somewhere in that manner.
I'd say we could pull 10 different policies, but it's going to be unique to South Whidbey because we're our own unique culture and it needs to reflect our population. And it's part of why we're looking at it now, because we change.
Said much better than I could have.
Thank you.
Let's see here. I believe that's, unless there are any other comments or questions on the dress code going forward. Anything from any of the board members? Jordan, is there anything in particular that you'd like to see or not see, or any input that you have on this?
Nothing new. I'm just appreciating that the board is able to see all these concerns coming from students and staff, and that we are moving forward with it.
I will just share with you, Brooke, that I have lots of thoughts, but I'm reserving those to see how this progresses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Then if we're done with this topic, I wanted to note that Oak Harbor School District has wonderfully put together an opportunity for our school boards, for their school board, Coopville's and South Woodby's, to meet with some of our elected representatives in the next week. And so myself and others on the board will be taking advantage of that opportunity. So I'm really excited to get an opportunity to bring, for us to bring
Wait for it. He'll be back.
Well said, Brooke. That was great.
I'm just eloquent as all get out tonight, freezing and all. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us to elevate South Woodby and other elsewhere on the island concerns up to our elected officials, and I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah. Anyone else have anything to bring up? Oh, we've got a Q&A here. Yes, Gwendy says, Brooke, please get better Wi-Fi. I'm going to be calling my provider tomorrow. It's already in my calendar to do so.
I'm up for adjournment if that's where you're headed.
Great, I'm going to adjourn. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.